Jack Johnson joins us. He is Senate Majority Leader in the Tennessee General Assembly to talk about activity today and over the course of the week and when we might expect the General Assembly to wrap up their work for this session or this year. Senator Johnson, good afternoon. Welcome.
Hey, Matt. Good to be with you again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you. It's my understanding, I know this happened in the other body, but today probably the biggest activity, you tell me if I'm wrong here, involved the House agreeing with the Senate. I believe the Senate had already passed SB 799, and the House has now passed 855. This would make primaries our way of doing business when it comes to political activity amongst. Is this only a Republican thing, or is it for the Democrats as well, Jack?
No, it is for any partisan election for county office, and just to refresh, Matt. So current statute already requires that primaries be held for state Senate, state House, United States Congress, United States Senate governor, those types of races. But parties are under current law allowed to, instead of having a primary where any member of a party can come vote, can call for a caucus, which means you have to go to a certain place at a certain time on a certain day. And so what we did is, we use this term frequently in government, we codified existing practice. We said that any county that's doing a primary now, and over 70 of our 95 counties have partisan races and do a primary. So we just said, if you're doing that, you need to keep doing that. If you're doing a caucus, and we have some small rural counties that are doing caucuses, they are grandfathered under the law. But we need to make sure that anyone who's a Republican or Democrat and wants to pick their party's nominee for county mayor or sheriff or county clerk is able to participate in that election.
What differences, if any, are there between the two bills?
None. The House today, Representative Lee Reeves, who's been on your show talking about this, he conformed to the Senate bill, and it passed rather decisively, and so it's now headed to the governor's desk.
You expect him to sign it, I suppose?
I do. I very much believe that he will.
And for those in your home county of Williamson, there's a lot of talk, a lot of chatter around Williamson County about newly elected leadership. And this obviously is not going to impact that leadership in any way, but it will impact how they are allowed to move forward in terms of how they form the structure under which they vote.
That is correct. This legislation did absolutely nothing to affect the way we elect party leadership, and I don't know for certain that the Williamson County Republican Executive Committee would have chosen to do away with the primary and go to a caucus. I think there are some who advocate for that, but I think that's the wrong direction to go. And we've talked about this. If you're in the military and you're deployed overseas, you don't get to participate because you can't be there to show up for that caucus. If you're a first responder, a firefighter, a police officer, or you're an emergency room nurse and you happen to have to work a shift on the day of that caucus, you are disenfranchised. And that's not what we do as Republicans. We want Republicans to be able to come and pick their party's nominee. And if the Democrats wish to hold a primary to nominate someone for any of those offices, they should be able to do so as well. But we don't need to go back to kind of Tammany Hall-style politics where a handful of people gather and pick party nominees. That's the way it used to be done, potentially rife with corruption. Our primaries are run by our election commissions. Tennessee is number one in the nation for election integrity, so we need to keep the system we have.
There is a debate ongoing on the floor of the General Assembly regarding the ability to bar attendance or charge tuition for the children of illegal aliens in the state of Tennessee. And I don't know if I'm saying that exactly correctly, but I want you to speak to this. It is an attempt, in my opinion, to directly ask the Supreme Court whether or not it wants to revisit the concept of Plyler v. Doe, which was a 1982 Supreme Court ruling that indicated that the states may not prevent the education of kids based on the status, their legal status. Where are we in this process? And do I have it right that this is an effort to get this in the courts to ask the question of whether or not we need to revisit it, especially considering, Jack, that in the past 4 years, sadly, we've just seen so much illegal alien activity across the United States of America, including here in the state of Tennessee. It's become quite a financial burden on the state, particularly considering that many of these children are not English speakers.
You hit the nail on the head, Matt, and you're right. And for historical context, 1982, there was a case that went to the United States Supreme Court, and it's called Plyler v. Doe. And it came out of Texas. What Texas decided in 1982 is that if you are in the country illegally, if you're a child and you're not in the country legally, that you should be treated similarly to how you might treat a child who is out of zone. And districts do that in Tennessee today, and they did it in Texas. If you live in a neighboring county and you wish to cross county lines and attend a different school district, and that county allows that, they can charge you tuition because you don't pay property taxes in that particular county. And so pretty reasonable, I think, proposal. Well, it was challenged in the Supreme Court. Now, what I want your listeners to know, Matt, is at that time, estimates are that there were 3 million illegal aliens in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. 3 million. Now, look at where we are today. We don't know how many, but it's easily in the multiple tens of millions of illegal immigrants, due in large part to the failures of the Biden administration during the 4 years he was in office, but not exclusively to that. It's been a big problem for a number of years. And so I'm a co-sponsor of the legislation. Senator Bo Watson is the prime sponsor, along with William Lamberth in the House. And it does exactly what you said. It is permissive on local districts to say you are allowed under state law to charge tuition to the families of children who wish to attend your school who are not in the country legally. And we have run the numbers on this, Matt, and we don't know exactly, and that's part of the problem, is we don't know how many people are in our state or even in our country illegally, and that's a big problem in and of itself. But best estimates are you're somewhere in the 80 to 90,000 kids in Tennessee schools that are in the country illegally. Many of them, not necessarily all, but many of them are non-English speakers. And our Department of Education people tell us that to educate one of those children during a given school year costs an additional $3,500. Now, the average for a child in Tennessee is probably around $11,000-$12,000, and that's for all kids. Add another $3,500 to that, and you multiply it by the number of kids. You're well over $300 million that it is costing Tennessee taxpayers to teach these kids. It is perfectly reasonable to have legislation to say that districts can permissively, we don't require it, but pass a policy to say you can charge those families. Number one, ascertain their legal status, and if it's determined they're not in the country legally, then you can charge tuition. Now, the bill will be challenged. It is if it becomes law, it's highly likely that it will be enjoined based on that Plyler decision. We are hopeful that the court will ultimately revisit this decision. Now, the last thing I want to say on this, Matt, is I think every child ought to be educated. A child should not be punished for the sins of their parents. And as long as I'm in office, I will do everything I can. If it means that the state needs to step up to the plate, if families can't afford to pay that tuition, then perhaps we need to find ways, think creatively in public-private partnerships to create some scholarships to help these kids get educated. But we need to address, because of that decision, we are forced to turn a blind eye to this problem and treat every child, regardless of their immigration status or legal status in the country, all the same. And that's unfair to our school districts. It's unfair to the taxpayers of Tennessee.
Well, and it's a problem that we didn't ask for in the state of Tennessee. Sadly, it was exacerbated over the last 4 years, and we are left to deal with it. And these are some of the hard ways that we have to deal with these issues. And I don't begrudge you having to make these decisions. And obviously, you're sensitive to the plight of the children. They had, in a lot of ways, in many cases, they had zero to do with this, but at the same time, their parents did. And so we've got to deal with that in our state. The IVF legislation, I believe that it passed unanimously in the Senate, did it not?
I believe so. I'd have to go back and check.
Well, but I mean, I think it's passed, and it's just codifying under the law. I don't believe that there are any issues with availability to in vitro fertilization in the state of Tennessee, but this is just making sure that there won't be any issues down the road.
That's exactly right. I think it's largely preemptive. In some of the different conversations we've had about this particular subject matter, there have been some false information that's been disseminated out there about IVF. We want any family that needs it, that is experiencing difficulty in having children, to have access to it, and that shouldn't get clouded by any of the conversations we've had about our staunch belief that we should protect the sanctity of life.
Is there any concern, Jack, and I know this is really very technical, but is there any concern that those two issues kind of come to loggerheads under the law because traditional approaches to IVF might include the creation of embryos that never go used. And it's my understanding that under current law in the state of Tennessee, that once an embryo is considered a person with rights. Does my question make sense?
It does, and you've brought up a complicated subject matter that warrants very, very careful, thoughtful consideration about where these two things. I believe in the sanctity of life, and I believe life begins at conception. And so, but at the same time, I do want families to be able to utilize the technology to be able to have children utilizing, the miracles of medical technology. And so it's that balancing act. And that's what we're trying to address right now. And because I think you can believe in both. I think you can believe in protecting the sanctity of life, but you also support medical science.
Well, and what I'm concerned about is that people that do not want our laws to be what they are with regard to the sanctity of life are going to try to use it against us, use the IVF legislation against us, is my fear.
And I think you're spot on with that. And there are some who I think intentionally do try to cloud the message and allege hypocrisy. And we certainly don't want to be hypocrites, but I think you can do both. And that's part of the conversation we're having.
Speaking of I couldn't help myself. Speaking of hypocrisy, let's talk about taxing. No, I'm just kidding. You knew I had to get you on the vape bill. So we planned on Senator Ken Yeager last week, and I had a good conversation offline with Senator Yeager. We were unable to do that. I guess I think storms knocked us off.
Weather,
it was the weather.
Yes, I remember.
But the Senate eventually passed the vape bill. Are you comfortable with the vape bill as it? I mean, I guess it's getting debated currently in the House. Some business owners say it goes way too far. They don't have a problem with cracking down on underage kids buying these things and cracking down on those that would sell them. They think maybe it goes too far in terms of taxation. What say you, Jack?
Well, I think, and by the way, I've talked to dozens of constituents that are in the business or, supporting and opposing this. I think some really good, productive conversations. And I don't think the conversation is necessarily over even with this legislation. I recognize that vaping, I don't vape, I don't smoke, but I recognize that vaping for some people is an alternative and perhaps, might be a better from a health situation than smoking. And there's some people, and I think if you're an adult and you want to vape, you ought to be able to vape. I share your libertarian-leaning tendencies in that regard. But we do have an issue in what Senator Yeager, and I hope you can get him on because this is an issue he has studied forwards and backwards, and I've great respect for Senator Yeager, is that there are some of these products that have gone through an FDA type of process. And I don't put a lot of faith in the FDA or the federal government, to be clear, but there are also a lot of these products that people use, chemicals and things that they use in these products that are being shipped in from China with little to no oversight or regulation or anything like that. So I think there's a health component on that. And regarding the taxing, we had a lengthy conversation about that as well. And as it's explained to me by our finance folks, is that on a per unit equivalent. So if you take a cigarette versus the equivalent of that in a vape product, we're taxing vape less than we tax cigarettes. I know we tax cigarettes at 62 cents a pack. And when you break it down, we're taxing it lower than we tax cigarettes. Now, are we taxing it at the right rate? I'm with you. I'm not a fan of taxes, but I do think taxes ought to be fair and equitable. And so that's part of the conversation. And they're still talking about it in the House, and there may be some modifications made. And Senator Yeager is a very reasonable person, and if it comes back to us in a modified form, we're happy to take another look at it.
Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson with us talking about activity in the General Assembly today and otherwise. Anything I'm missing in the Senate? What did you guys accomplish today, Jack?
Well, I have two bills that I'm really excited about, Matt, and we did not, they were calendared for today's floor session. We did not get to those. They're rolled to tomorrow, and I expect to take them up. But I have two bills, one that's going to, I believe, fully eliminate any element of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, in the state. Two bills, one that deals with any use of DEI relative to employment practices in the state, promotions, hiring, anything like that. We should be hiring people on merit or based on their merit. And then then another relative to delivery of services. So, if someone's receiving services from the state, it ought to be based on need. It shouldn't be based on, any immutable characteristic, as is the case. And we're really parroting what President Trump is doing at the federal level. In fact, the executive order he issued back on January 22nd, I have a copy of it in front of me. I don't think it was nearly as pervasive or rampant throughout state government, but there were elements that were there. And so I'm happy that Tennessee is kind of following in the path of President Trump and making sure we're delivering services and we're hiring and promoting people based on need or merit and not based on any other factor.
Sounds like common sense bills. Man, it must have been a busy day on the floor of the Senate when the Senate Majority Leader had to table his bills.
Well, we had a heavy calendar, and one thing I've learned there is that if after we go for a certain amount of time, it's probably best that we cut it off. People start to get tired and a little chippy at times.
They get hangry down there on the floor.
Right, and so that's okay. We're still going to finish next week, and we've had a really great productive session for the people.
I mean, is the expectation as we're winding down? I mean, how many more days do you think there will be?
Yeah, so the plan is, the big issue obviously is getting the budget passed, and we're making our way through the committee process and plan to have the budget for the next fiscal year on the floor of the Senate and the House, hopefully on Wednesday. One chamber might do it Wednesday and the other on Thursday, and then once that's done, then we come back. It takes us usually 2 to 3 days to clean up issues that are what we refer to as behind the budget. So we'll be out here next week. I don't know if it'll be Tuesday or Wednesday, but we've had a good, productive, efficient session, and unlike Washington, at the state in the General Assembly, we get our work done. We go back home to our communities, our families, our jobs, and I'm looking forward to doing that.
Senator, thank you for being so available to the listeners of Super Talk and to us on the Matt Murphy Show. We always appreciate your time, and we'll talk again very soon.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Jack.